Afternoon, everyone. My name is Diego Portillo Mazal. I'm the director of the Inner City Capital Connections program. And right now, we're going to transition and have a conversation about the PPP, and probably a program that requires little or no introduction. It's been one of the biggest buzzwords of the year, has been the government's response to the coronavirus and its economic effects on our communities. This is a program, however, that was built as the pandemic was spreading. And so many have compared it to building the plane while already flying. It's had its issues, it's had its difficulties, it had a lot of different stages of implementation, changing guideposts in some ways, and has had its difficulties in reaching many of the businesses that it was created for. Therefore, we thought it was important to have a conversation around where does the program stand today? What do we see for it in the future? What obstacles have been seen, and what are people who are doing this work every day hearing about the program? We started, coincidentally, one of our first webinars this year was precisely on this topic, so it brings us right back to its core. And for that conversation, we are honored today to have Daniel Martiniello, Lender Relations Specialist at the Massachusetts District Office of the U.S. Small Business Administration, Xiomara Peña, Vice President of Engagement at Small Business Majority, and Karleen Porcena, Vice President and Relationship Manager at Berkshire Bank here in Boston. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the conversation over, and we'll have a little introduction from Dan, followed by Xiomara, and then Karleen, and then we'll just switch over into a conversation format. So Dan?
Hey, thank you, Diego, and good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Dan Martinello. I work for the Massachusetts District Office. I know a lot of you on the call are probably from, over here on the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. So thanks for joining. But, and like Diego alluded to, the PPP has gone through a lot of changes, and we're going to continue to see changes. So I know you as a small business owner, borrowers, you want to keep up to date with as many changes as possible. One thing I would like to relay to everybody, when you're looking for the correct changes, make sure you're utilizing the correct sources where those changes can be found. So treasury.gov, SBA.gov, you're going to find a wealth of information there, whether all the interim rule changes, all of your forgiveness instructions, all of that's going to be listed on those two websites. So, please make sure that when you're collecting this information, because it does change from time to time, make sure that you utilize those sites to your advantage. So, I know most folks, they probably have heard of the PPP and the process, and, it was difficult for some, maybe easy for others, but right now I'm assuming most folks are in the forgiveness process, or they're still utilizing the funds depending on when they receive their actual PPP loan. But a couple of things you want to just keep note. Make sure that when it comes to your PPP loan and knowing what you need to do in your next steps, make sure that you're keeping in constant contact with the lender that you did this PPP loan with. So one thing you want to keep in mind, this was a delegated authority by our lending partners, which means our lending partners were the ones who approved these loans based on the information that you provided them, your payroll information, your tax information, your different certifications. So make sure that also too, you find out from them what type of forgiveness application they need you to fill out. A lot of them are utilizing third-party sources as well to do online applications. So make sure that you connect with them to find out what the correct course of action is when it comes to your forgiveness steps. Also, too, make sure you have plenty of time when it comes to asking for forgiveness. So with some of the changes that occurred, you as a small business owner have 10 months after your covered period is over to submit for forgiveness. So this should give you enough time to compile all the documentation that you need, whether it's your eligible payroll expenses and the documentation that entails with that, or your non-payroll expenses. So keep that in mind. We see a lot of folks sometimes trying to rush the minute their covered period is over that they want to submit for forgiveness, and that you do have, the time, allotted to you. And if you're not sure, make sure you can get all your ducks in a row. There's plenty of resources out there also that can help you. We have a variety of resources at the SBA, whether it's the small business development centers, whether it's SCORE, whether it's your local resources, wherever you are around the country. You have chambers and things like that that can help you, with this process, or maybe refer you to someone that can help you, with this process. Once you've compiled all of your documentation, make sure that you submit that with the proper form to your PPP lender, and then continue to communicate with your lender throughout the process. And just for a little background on what the forgiveness process behind the scenes entails. So let's say you applied for forgiveness today. Basically, your lender, whoever that may be, has 60 days to submit that completed application with any supporting documentation that was necessary to the SBA. So the lender itself has their own portal that the SBA, that they have to submit these applications to. Once they submit that into the SBA has up to 90 days to provide a final remittance on forgiveness. So a couple of things you want to keep in mind that happened within the CARES Act is you have two major programs. So you have the PPP, and then you have your economic injury disaster loans. So those were the two major programs when it came to small businesses and economic relief during this pandemic. So with the CARES Act and the way it's currently written, there was a lot of talk about the EIDL advance that a lot of folks also may have applied for, and that was an advance of up to $10,000. What happens with the CARES Act is basically the way it's written, it doesn't allow for any one business entity to get more than one grant. So they actually have to consolidate that into the PPP forgiveness process. So if you got an EIDL advance, when you submit your forgiveness application, you may, your lender may have to deduct the EIDL advance if you received one. So that could be up to $10,000 depending on, the size of your business. And then at the end of the day, once the SBA comes back and remits final forgiveness, you'll have to, just set up a payment plan with your lender based on the terms of your original note. So if you applied prior to June 5th, so there was some changes on June 5th due to the Flexibility Act, you may be on a 2-year maturity. So at a 1% fixed interest rate. So you may have to be on that payment plan. Or if you applied June 5th or after, you probably are on a 5-year maturity for your loan. So then your lender will notify you of when the payments will start, from there. Another thing to note when it comes to the maturity date, if you feel like you're going to have issues paying, if you do end up owing something at the end of the day, talk to your lender. You and your lender can come to a mutual decision to extend that maturity date if necessary. But at the end of the day, it has to be a mutual agreement. So, I can't guarantee you that just because you request it, that your lender will actually agree to it. So just keep that, in mind. Another thing when it comes to the economic debt relief, now that PPP is technically over, and as you can see, it's probably more than likely headed to opening up again. One thing to keep in mind too, the one thing that is still open and consistently been open is the EIDL loan. So the EIDL loan is the economic injury disaster loan, and that can actually be, you can apply for that on SBA's website itself. So that's a loan that's direct from the SBA through the Treasury. So, that is open to application. From what we're hearing, we're seeing that the portal for that may close by the end of this month. However, with all the changes going on in Congress right now, that could change as well. But for right now, what we've been told from the Disaster Center, if you are looking to apply, it would probably behoove you to apply sooner rather than later. And that can be used for a variety of things for your small business. So, typically, accounts payable, any sort of business debt that you would have paid on a month-to-month basis had not the pandemic had not occurred. So, keep that in mind. That's another option out there. Just also to note, that is a loan. So when it comes to, the big difference, the PPP is, for all intents and purposes, going to turn into a grant, or the majority of it should turn into a grant, where the EIDL loan is a long-term loan with a low interest rate. So another thing too, when it comes to the PPP, there's a lot of talk of who got funds, who didn't got funds. Did the dollars go to the smallest of the small businesses? And a couple of things I just want to share with you folks. So as far as total amount of loans given out, we saw upwards of 5.2 million loans actually get approved through our lending partners. So across the United States, and over 87% of those loans were for $150,000 or less. So the majority, of the applications that came in at the end of the day were to the small businesses. However, like Diego alluded to, nothing is perfect with this program. And you can see that there was a variety of changes over the course of time. And, with this next wave potentially coming in, there's probably going to be even more changes to make sure, that we are putting the dollars into the street to the businesses that really are affected by this pandemic. So that's going to continue to change, and hopefully change for the better. Make sure that everybody, gets an opportunity to hopefully, continue, keeping their business open, because as we know, with the winter coming up and different COVID cases, different states are starting to roll things back. I know here in Massachusetts, our governor, just started rolling back a few things. I didn't get a chance to watch the whole conference, but it's going to vary from state to state. So some businesses may be more affected than others when it comes to these different rollbacks. And just, one last thing I just want to mention, when it comes to the SBA, I know everybody talks about PPP now and the EIDL, but, the SBA is still up and running when it comes to all of its other programs and services. So whether you need small business technical assistance help through, some of our resource partners, the Center for Women and Enterprise, VBOC, and the few I mentioned earlier, they're all out there to help you. They're there to help you for free as well. So also to our loan programs, you might be a small business that needs access to capital. Maybe you are doing well during this pandemic and you need to expand your business. All of our normal lending programs, whether it's the 7A, the 504 micro loan programs, all of those are still up and running. And then also too, the SBA, it's not known as much, but the federal contracting programs are available. We have surety bond programs, export and trade assistance. So you'll see that we do a little bit of everything and try to help small businesses start, grow, and continue, their operations. So I will turn, that's all I have. I'll turn this over to Xiomara. I think she's next.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you, Diego, also for setting us up. And I'm also here with the fellow panelists, distinguished panelist, Karleen, who will be joining us in a minute. I'm Xiomara Peña. I'm the Vice President of Engagement with Small Business Majority. Small Business Majority is a national small business advocacy organization. We've been around since 2005, doing work on a number of different policy issues. And quite frankly, as Diego mentioned, this has been a really challenging year for small businesses. So for you small business owners out there tuning in today, thank you for hanging in there. We know this is a very, very challenging year. And we hope that you're able to continue to gain the resources that you need to continue to keep your businesses thriving. Over the last few months, our organization has had a number of events. I think the last number I checked, it was something like 350 plus events. A majority of those have been on the topic of access to capital and the various options that exist, and specifically the Paycheck Protection Program. And how Diego and Dan alluded, this is something that was created. It was essentially building the plane and flying it at the same time. And we recognize that there were some shortcomings of the program itself. So I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the data that we've seen and the trends, and then our recommendations as an organization around how we can improve the program in the next round so that it is more equitable and so that the dollars do flow to the micro businesses that make up the majority of the businesses in this country. I'm here in California, and I know that here in this state, 2 of every 3 jobs are created by a small business. And a majority of businesses nationally have less than 10 employees. And so when we look at the foundational basics of the Paycheck Protection Program, it was established in a way that did create a very, very long line and placed small businesses, especially those with smaller payrolls, majority of the businesses, at the end of the line. Now, that wasn't uniformly across the spectrum. There were some lending partners that did a phenomenal job in getting the loans approved. We saw success with community banks, credit unions, small businesses that worked through a community development financial institution partner, and the like. I think that those were some of the stories, and anecdotally, and the data does show that we're able to get small businesses that were able to get their PPP loan processed in a faster rate. So when we look at the data, through the PPP, the SBA did disperse over $500 billion in loans to small businesses. And the average loan size of the most recent data that was released on the 1st of December averaged around $107,000, for a total of about $521 billion. Now, in addition, the newly released data does show that about half of the $522 billion went to bigger businesses, and only 28% of the money that was distributed was in amounts of less than $150,000. And again, if we go back to the basic formula, it was average payroll, monthly payroll of the business times 2.5, and that would give you your loan amount. I know there's some additional mathematics in there, but at the very basics, that was the formula, right? Now, in late August, the SBA had released another bulk of data that did show some of the loan approvals, both from the first round and the second round. It also did remove some of the loans that were canceled and remove some of the errors around duplicate loan applications. And so we as an organization were pleased that the SBA has been able to correct some of the data. However, there are so many questions and concerns that we have about the initial data that we do still have. There isn't a lot of clarification about how well or how equitably these funds were distributed, and we recognize that there's an area for improvement as we think about putting together and as legislators are thinking about the next round of PPP dollars. Now, the data did also show that there were some businesses that were able to get served through the PPP process, smaller businesses. However, again, they typically had to go through a smaller lending institution partner to get that loan approved in a faster rate. There is some data that is also missing that we are very, very interested in being able to see, especially as we think about, again, the true face of entrepreneurship, true face of small business ownership, knowing that women own, a good amount of small businesses in this country, minorities, et cetera. And so we'd love to be able to see in the next pool of data or the next data set that is distributed by the SBA some comprehensive demographic information, some details about how much money a borrower requested versus what they received. That was particularly important. I believe it was NCRC did a mystery shopping type of project once the PPP was announced with Black borrowers and white borrowers, and found some very disproportionate access points for both borrowers looking for with the same kind of credit profiles. We know in our own surveying of small businesses that we've been able to do, that many of the businesses that we've spoken to applied for an amount that they didn't really receive the full amount that they were looking for. And in some cases, we did see PPP loan disbursements of $1. So there are some questions, but again, kudos to the SBA. I believe they processed as many EIDL loans, the same amount of EIDL loans in over a 14-day period than they had for a number of years. And so again, these are some of the shortcomings, but we recognize that there are some areas and reforms that could be made so that the PPP program can really work for all and be more inclusive. Some of the things that we're calling for as an advocacy organization include extending the application deadline through the end of the year, so that because there are still some remaining dollars that did remain in the pot, and so we'd love to be able to tap into that to those dollars and have businesses still apply, the folks that need the resources. We'd love for there to be an ensuring of small businesses in the most need and having them apply for another round of PPP should their business need it. So again, if you recall, you were only able to apply for one PPP loan per business. And so being that the first application wave was in April, we're now in December. We know that many folks, even if they were conservative, may have already depleted those funds. And a lot of folks, I think Gusto also is a online payroll company. They did some great data pulling with nearly 40,000 clients of theirs that received PPP loans. And they found that a bulk of their clients or borrowers for PPP were able to deplete those funds early on so that they could apply for forgiveness. And so again, there is still a lot of need as we are now going into as some states are seeing their second or third waves of COVID cases rise. We'd love to see in the next round a prioritizing of small businesses owned by people of color, of women, and other minorities, including businesses in rural parts of the country where we don't know that there was a significant amount of dollars that went there. One thing that could be done to make everyone's lives easier, especially small businesses that are still struggling to keep their doors open, automatically forgiving loans of under $150,000. This represents about 86% of the program's smallest borrowers, but only about 25% of the funds distributed through the PPP program. Another thing that could be done is incentivizing lenders to process and make small dollar loans by providing lenders with a minimum processing fee of $2,500 per loan. There was an incentive structure that was supposed to incentivize some of the larger institutions to provide PPP dollars to small borrowers. However, even so, the mathematics, if you take 1% of a $1 million loan versus a 3% of a $100,000 loan, the incentive structure was not there to really. The incentive structure really created that long line. Another thing that we've asked for is eliminating the current requirement that at least 60% of the loan funds are used for payroll costs in order to be forgiven. We know that it's COVID. Many small businesses have had to make arrangements to keep their establishments open. This includes the purchase of plexiglass, PPE, a number of different other protocols that you might have had to make in order to keep your business open. And so these are just some of the requirements these are some of the recommendations that we've submitted to policymakers on behalf of small businesses in order to improve the program. Now, where we find ourselves and where we're going, I can't tell you for certain when we'll see the next batch of stimulus come down. What I know is small businesses are critical to our economy. And so legislators, policymakers understand that we need some relief. We need relief quickly. And that relief should really come in the form of grants and not loans, which I think to some degree the PPP loan was designed to do that. This is complex. Us as an organization, we're one resource. We connect business owners to resources. We're not a membership-driven organization. Our resources are free. We house all of our resources on our online platform called Adventurize, adventurize.org. And one tip that I will leave you with before I turn it over is don't try to do this alone. These are challenging times. Find advocates in your community that can advocate on your behalf, as well as you are advocating for yourself and your business at the same time. And so that means align yourself with the chamber, work with a small business development center. These are your tax dollars at work. Small business development centers are also funded by the SBA and can provide technical assistance on, with the loan application, information on other programs that you may qualify for. Sometimes they will connect you to resources that you might not have heard of. And we're running a pilot here in California with bookkeeping services, since we know folks need to have their books in order to apply for loans and for other capital. So don't go at it alone. These are challenging times. Hang in there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Karleen, which is the Vice President Relationship Manager over at Berkshire Bank. Karleen?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Xiomara and Dan, for those remarks. Diego, really appreciate the work that you and ICIC are doing and have literally continued to do for many years, just providing these critical services to small businesses within our community. So thank you for having us. Thank you for inviting me. As Xiomara mentioned, I'm Karleen Porcena. I am the VP Relationship Manager for Berkshire Bank. We're a community bank. We operate in about 100 or so branches throughout New England and New York. I'm here in Boston. And my role is essentially to work specifically with building relationships and offering products and services to underserved populations. And we have this service called My Bankers that essentially work as kind of concierge bankers to individuals despite what their income is. And I think, one of the things that has been so clear through this whole PPP process is the importance of really and truly having a relationship with your lender. I can't tell you how important that is. So many of us have struggled this year, with everything that's been going on, with COVID, with what we've been seeing with the racial injustice in this country. But there is no doubt that small businesses have really, really taken a toll. My experience over this year with the PPP process has really been trying to facilitate an approach that is truly equitable to supporting some of the small businesses who weren't hearing back from their banks. I've spoke with people countless times that have said, I've called, I've emailed, I've left messages, and no one is getting back to me. And it's heartbreaking to see people, have this resource, but not figure out ways to access it. And those access points are what we see with how these funds were distributed, right? The people that needed it the most were the ones to get it at the last, or fairly, at the back of the line, as we just previously heard. So some of the things that we tried to do at Berkshire to kind of mitigate a lot of those challenges were hosting webinars. We had tons and tons of webinars to talk about the process, how to apply. We really tried to gear those webinars towards people who were kind of the untraditional borrowers. So a lot of the sole proprietors who didn't know they were eligible for the loans, faith-based organizations, nonprofits, who again, would never see themselves as eligible to apply for something from the SBA, and a lot of the times we're actually disqualifying themselves. So part of our role was almost to kind of convince people to take a look at this and see if it was something that could truly benefit them. The bank launched what we call the Revex Labs. I'm actually sitting in here now, but it's both a physical and online space that's focused on, again, providing different services and making sure that people know about how to access different things. I'm not going to go through too much of what we did in the past, because I really do want to kind of focus on forgiveness and what to look forward to in the future. But there's a couple of things that I wanted to just quickly highlight and leave time for some questions. But although the applications are the same, for the forgiveness, depending on who your lender is, there might be a different process, as Dan had mentioned. We are using a third party called NextGen, and our borrowers have access to this online. You have a unique kind of link that you're able to apply with both your application and supporting documents. But one of the things that I really want to just make sure that people truly understand is the difference between the covered time versus the forgiveness time, because it is a little tricky, and the information that gets put out there, I have to like read it 10 times to be able to understand it myself. But the the covered time is different from the repayment time. And I think people are getting very anxious because they're seeing that covered time coming, or they might have passed, but you actually have 10 months from the last day of your covered time in order to apply for forgiveness. So, make sure that you know what your numbers are and what your dates are. And then from that last date, you truly have 10 months. I know people are trying to apply as quickly as possible, but there is some time to be able to do this in a way that is thoughtful, making sure that you have all your paperwork together. If you're able to talk to someone else who can help you, go through the application and make sure that you have all your T's and I's crossed and everything like that, that's going to be crucial. I would say, unfortunately, right now, we're also seeing an uptake of scammers. So we've had to warn a lot of our borrowers to be conscious of what's going on right now. We've seen people asking for payment for services. So again, it's crucial to make sure that you're having conversations with your bank. If you see an email or a phone call that looks suspicious, trust your gut and make sure that you're not paying for any service fees for help on the forgiveness application process. Make sure you're contacting your lender to ensure that it came from them. Let's see, what else is important to talk about? There's always updated information. So whether you're on the Treasury website or again, your lender's website, a lot of lenders have kind of made specific PPP pages. Take a look at that. There's different forgiveness applications depending on the size of your loan. One of the things that we were happy to see was the easy application that was released. So again, if you're a business that has a loan of under $50,000, there has been a simplified process for you. I'm sure many people already know about this, but there is some leniencies that we were happy to see the SBA take for some of those smaller loans. Of course, we'd love to see the recommendation that Xiomara mentioned, have this kind of blanket forgiveness, which would be great on all fronts. But for right now, make sure that you have the information that you need in order to apply for the specific forgiveness application. And again, you can go on the Treasury website, or you can go on Berkshire Bank website or your lenders to get more information about that. You want to also just make sure right now, if you're thinking about, well, how do I prepare myself for forgiveness? One of the things that you should have heard is you want to make sure that things are separated, right? You don't want funds to be flowing in and out of personal accounts and all of that. You want to make sure that you have payroll documentation, proof of payment statements. If your loan had non-payroll charges on it, or things like utilities or rent and stuff like that, you need to make sure that you kept all of those receipts in a way that you're able to find them quickly, and when the time comes that you're able to do that. But for the most part, I think that everyone has kind of mentioned, and I'll just reiterate that there's tons of resources out there to help you through this process, especially in Massachusetts. If you're here, the resources are endless, but you are not in this alone. It is very crucial that, as a banker, and this is weird for me to say because I come from a nonprofit background, but as a banker, we want the best for our small businesses as well. And we want to make sure that people are have all of the most up-to-date information that they do have before applying for this forgiveness process. So I'll turn it back over to Diego to answer any specific questions, or if the audience has some questions, I'm happy to answer as well.
Thanks, Karleen. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Xiomara. Yeah, as you can imagine, our chat box is flooded with some very specific questions, but I'll start with the big one first. I think obviously a lot of this had to do There were a lot of things that had to do with how quickly you were spending the money, how quickly you were expected to pay it back, how quickly you all alluded to the fact that there was some confusion on how quickly you should apply for the forgiveness, how quickly you might hear back on whether you were forgiven, what part of this might be forgiven. And so I think the biggest question is, with some of these ideas or some sentiment that the rules haven't been entirely finalized, do you wait until the rules are entirely clear? Or do you go through, I need to do this year for tax purposes? So yes, Dan, I'll have you kick that conversation.
Thanks. Well, so I mean, as far as tax purposes go, that's going to be a business to business decision. So, you know, each business is going to look at that particular point differently, because that may benefit some and not others. You know, we tend to tell folks to, you know, be patient with things, because like we've all alluded to, this program has gone through an abundance of changes, and you have time to submit forgiveness. You have, you know, you have an elected, you can either do an 8-week covered period or a 24-week covered period, but you have 10 months after that covered period ends to submit for forgiveness before you have to make any sort of payments, if any payments. So if it's me, why not utilize that time? Especially where I think most of us understand that there probably are going to be some additional changes. You know, if you have the time and you're not 100% sure of how to submit everything, do you have everything, you know, that you need to submit? Take the time. And like we've all three of us, or all four of us have mentioned, there's plenty of resources out there to help you with those things too. Resource partners, there's plenty of local, you know, and national services that can help you, you know, make sure you have all your ducks in a row at the end of the day. So I would say take your time with things.
Karleen, any different sense?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we can't advise businesses when to actually apply for these. And it's frustrating because you never want to tell someone, oh, well, go check in with your tax accountant, when majority of the businesses that we work with don't have tax accountants. They're doing it on their own and they're figuring out on their own. But I would just echo, you know, what Dan said. One, know what your dates are, right? Like, are you applying way too early? If you have almost a year left, take your time. I think some of the advances that we've seen, legislation, or some of the advances that we've already seen with some of the easing of the applications is a really good indicator that there might be some in the future, some continuous ones. But again, it's all speculation. For me, if I was a business owner and like this is taking my, you know, banker cap off, I'd also take my time to see where things go, where the new administration goes, and all of that. There's just so much changing happening within our government. I would utilize that to my advantage, wait for a bit, and then kind of pump into gear. While you're waiting doesn't mean you're just sitting around. Make sure that you have your backup documentation if things should move in a different direction. But again, yeah, I'd probably also just wait to see what happens.
Xiomara?
Yeah, I'll just add, you know, I think that when you as a business owner are looking at the forgiveness application, I know some lending institutions were completely, you know, they weren't accepting them even when it first was released. And so even on the lending institutions side, they're waiting to see, are there additional changes? Are we going to change it up more? And so, but just get the information that you need in order to make that informed decision for your small business.
Oh, and I just wanted to quickly add, make sure that, I think sometimes people are trying to get too much backup information. Like, make sure you know specifically what it is your loan is covering. If you're just applying for payroll, then all you need is payroll documentation. You don't need X, Y, and Z. If you're applying for payroll and utilities, that's when you need more information. But I have seen people like looking for more documentations that are on the actual application. So figure out which application you are going to be applying for, and then go by that list to make sure you know which backup documentation you need.
So So Karleen, I guess the next question is pretty much directly for you. You've all alluded to additional resources, not traveling this alone, but should my first call be to the banker to say, here's my specific loan, who's the next person I need to talk to?
I think it depends on what your question is, but I think that it's no matter where your loan is, even if you had a loan with us and then you move the money to another bank, you're going to be applying for the forgiveness with whoever gave you the loan. So your questions should go towards that lender. If they're not answering your questions, then I'd probably go to a plan B of talking with a technical assistance provider. But your lender is the one who's going to give you the answers to your specific loan application questions.
And the next question is pretty much directly to you. Rumor out there, or the sentiment out there, is that you have one shot at applying for the loan forgiveness. Therefore, you don't want to get it wrong because otherwise you're out of luck. Any truth to this?
Well, so as it stands, right now, once you apply, the lender is going to collect your information. Once they submit that application, there's not really much opportunity for the lender to kind of grab that application back if, say, 2 weeks later, the borrower might have wrote down incorrect information. Sometimes during the review process, that might actually get some incorrect information may get caught by the SBA, and then they'll contact the lender and let them know, figure out a way to mitigate that or fix that change. But for all intents and purposes, the lenders don't, once they submit that application, if it's ready to go, there's not much of an opportunity to get that back. The lender does have, but it's a very, once it goes in for review, it's there. If that changes, but we're not seeing too many, issues where if it's just something that maybe there was a amounts that were done incorrectly on the application. Most of the time, we're seeing that the lenders are catching those things because the lenders aren't just collecting the data and the application and not looking at it at all. They're reviewing it as well. They might not review it as in depth as they would a normal conventional loan, but they're reviewing the numbers to make sure that they're making sense. And if any red flags come off, they're probably stopping that before they even submit the actual application to the SBA.
This one's a point of clarification. Somebody says they never got the EIDL loan, but they got the initial grant. Does that initial grant come out of the PPP?
Yes. So
the advance?
Yes.
Yes. You're talking about the advance, right?
Yes.
So yeah, the EIDL loan had basically two parts. So you have the loan itself, which it would be, a regular term loan with an interest rate, for X amount of years. And then you had the advance or the grant, some folks called it different things. And that was separate. So the SBA and Treasury would send that to folks individually if they applied for it. Now, with that said, the CARES Act basically dictates that no one business entity can have more than one form of grant. So with the PPP for all intents and purposes is supposed to be a grant. So when the business borrower receives the EIDL advance as well, they actually have to combine that when they're going for their forgiveness. So that would be deducted, whatever that amount may be. It could be as low as $1,000. Probably if you're a sole proprietor or don't have any employees, you probably had maybe a $1,000 advance, and it could be up to $10,000. But that will be, as it stands right now, that will be deducted, from the overall forgiveness amount. But like I said, what we're saying today could change with different rules, changing. So just keep up to date. When those rules change, make sure you're checking, with your lender, with the SBA site, the Treasury site, because they're going to post all of that stuff immediately if anything that beneficial that changes for the borrowers.
There's one here about someone who says they applied for forgiveness, the lender approved the full amount forgiven, but and the SBA approved all but 10,000, and they said it was for accrued interest. Any clarification that you might be able to give on something like that?
Well, I mean,
too specific.
I mean, see, we don't see in the district offices, we don't actually have access to the portal. They kept it completely separate, so it's all handled centrally located. But you know, there is accrued interest. That, I mean, it must have been. I would assume that the loan is fairly large amount for $10,000 in accrued interest with a 1% loan. So, you know, that to me sounds more like it might have been the idle advance, but you know, it's hard unless I was able to like look at the application and connect with the lender. It'd really be, you know, be hard for me to.
Here's a more general one, I think, that applies to a lot of our businesses because it's about a restaurant. Obviously, they took the PPP, but still had to close and lay off a lot of people. So there is no payroll. Is there a way to use that money in other ways while you don't have people back at work?
Well, so right now, I think Xiomara was talking about it earlier, where you know, with the PPP funds, you have to use at least 60% of those funds towards payroll during your covered period. The other 40% you can utilize for eligible non-payroll costs, and there's a lot of different things that cover, you know, whether it's your lease and things like that, different utility payments, stuff like that. What also too, there's different safe harbors, you know, in place for employers and borrowers, that if, you know, depending on their staff levels, depending on the health restrictions with their states, you know, there are safe harbors put in place that if they can get their full-time equivalents up by the end of the year, or if they couldn't due to health restrictions, a lot of times with restaurants and, you know, different states having different rules that all kind of trickle down from the federal level, you know, you know, those safe harbors won't ding them as far as getting reductions because of staff levels. But right now, you still, you know, to get full forgiveness, you know, potentially you'd have to use at least 60% of those funds for for payroll expenses. But again, those are one of the things that may, you know, change. I know Xiomara alluded to that as far as one of the requests that they, you know, folks are trying to bring up to the Hill.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I know that this was a question we got from some business owners saying, well, we got the PPP, our employees are not able to come back right now. Or if I have them back on payroll, I'm not going to have them doing the traditional work hours that they're going to have. And so to me, it seems, as a business owner, it seems, this is an anecdote. And to me, as a business owner, it seems like a waste of money. Like I'm going to pay someone to not be working. In essence, the PPP program was to support bringing back your staff. And so again, that's where that it was initially 75% of the money had to be spent on payroll, and then it dropped to 60%. So who knows, we might see a further drop, but it was really designed to keep folks on payroll. And we know that I referenced this earlier, but Gusto, which is a payroll company, they estimated with their recent survey that about 230,000 jobs have been lost for those companies that haven't had to retain their payroll levels for the PPP process. So we'll see folks bring back their staff, leverage the PPP dollars. Something happens, maybe they have additional rollbacks in their state and have to, you know, shut down again or reduce operations. And so that's just part of how the program was designed, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would add there is, again, make sure, depending on the size of the loan that you've applied for, if it's a smaller loan, and if they're you know, larger businesses, they don't qualify, but for loans that are under 50,000, there are some exemptions based on reduction for the loan forgiveness if there were FTE reductions. They've eliminated that Schedule A that requires you to make those kind of calculations on the application process. So it really depends on the type of loan that you've applied for, or the size of the loan that you've applied for, excuse me. Yeah,
we're estimating most folks to be utilizing either the 3508 Easy. So there's three applications. You have 3508, which is your standard, that long version that first came out that scared everybody, including myself. And then you have the 3508 Easy, which was the second one to come out, which made it a little easier for sole proprietors or small businesses that don't have any employees, also independent contractors. Anybody that may have several of the safe harbors come into play, they should be utilizing that. And then you also have, like Karleen alluded to, is that the 3508S, which is loans for $50,000 or under. However, keep in mind, even though with that $50,000 or under, you don't have to really show what you utilize the funds for. You're not going to get any reductions based on your FTE counts. You still want to maintain those records because your loan can go for review. We are seeing loans go for review, and I'm sure, Karleen, you probably have seen that at the bank, where it's just random loans are getting reviewed, and we're seeing as low as $2,000, $3,000 loans getting reviewed. And there's a lot of documentation that the SBA forgiveness team is looking for in those reviews. So that the borrower still needs to maintain those records, even though they don't have to necessarily provide it for their lender for the application process.
And I do want to just, on that note, one of the things that one of our SBDC partners worked on is, and some legal attorneys or attorneys that were providing legal assistance to small businesses were helping to draft the callback letters or return letters for employees. Because there is some language in there that says, like, if you attempted to get to your FTE count, but were unable to and can show a good faith attempt that you did try your best to get there, that would also be taken into consideration. So the record keeping, again, that's really important. It wasn't just picking up the phone and saying like, hey, we're back, things are back in order and we're calling me to work. It's literally like sending an official letter and having a copy of that record, and so that you can put your file together in that way.
So I guess the next couple questions are tied in a way. One basically says, given your advice, is there a way to pull back an application that you submitted last week for forgiveness and wait until there's more clarity? And the second part of that question, second question that's somewhat related, is somebody who applied 2 months ago and says they haven't heard back. Is there somewhere to check on the status of their application?
Yeah, so as far as pulling back, the application, you'd really have to talk to your lender, because it all depends on, every lender is going to have they're going to all submit it through the SBA's portal, but they all do it a little bit differently as far as their process. So you may have submitted the application. It might be in a review stage at their level still first. So you definitely would need to reach out to your lender to find out if they've actually submitted it to the SBA or not yet. Also, too, when it comes to these upcoming rule changes, whatever those may be, there might, if there's something that's going to benefit folks that haven't applied yet, they're probably going to retro on folks that have already applied for forgiveness as well, if it's to benefit everybody. So just keep that in mind, like with the idle advance, for instance, if that's something that ends up getting changed, I would assume that they're going to consider that for folks who applied for forgiveness earlier than the ones that waited, because it puts some folks at a disadvantage and others not. And then, what was the second part of that again?
If there is somewhere other than your lender to get an update on where your application stands, if the bank isn't getting back to you.
Yeah, really, I mean, there's only, you have to go through the lender. You know, the lender is going to get notified through the SBA's disaster portal what the decision. But just keep in mind that sometimes the lender just doesn't know, because the SBA itself, that portal, it's not designed to give the lender an update every few weeks, so they have to like physically send an email. A lot of times, from what I've seen with lenders doing that, they're just getting a generic email from the forgiveness department stating that they're working on the forgiveness application. But keep in mind that the interim rules do say that the SBA has up to 90 days to remit forgiveness. So if you're at that 2 months, maybe you want to have that conversation with your lender, but the lender really might not be able to get an answer for you because it's not hitting that 90-day mark on the SBA yet, and depending on how many loans or forgiveness apps are in the pipeline at the time.
Thank you. So, Xiomara, the next question had to do with you. Are you, and something that you talked about was advocating for a next round of PPP, basically being a fully new round where businesses might be able to apply again for additional funds, not just in case you missed round 1 or 2, correct?
Yes, it would really entail having the opportunity to obtain a second PPP loan, is what we're also advocating for. And I think that we'd want that to have some specific size restrictions, so that those dollars or those opportunities are really designed to meet very micro businesses. I don't know that calling out once, we recognize that not all industries have been impacted equally, right? Restaurants have been referenced here. And even though some restaurants may be able to operate with takeout, I mean, still the reduction in sales is probably already operating on such thin margins would not make sense. So I don't know that it makes sense to call out specific carve outs for specific industries, but on size, I think that makes a lot of sense. And even allocating those dollars or a second PPP round and ensuring that the lenders charged with redistributing those dollars include, community lenders, the CDFI partners, community development financial institutions that do tend to be more flexible in their lending standards for small businesses, especially those that may not be able to access traditional loan products. We also have I know we have had some opportunities where we've had a chance to amplify voices of small business owners, right? So media are consistently looking reporters are consistently looking to hear directly from business owners. And then we've also submitted a couple of letters to policymakers. And so we've had sign-on letters where we are, including in there what we're calling for and have opportunities for you to amplify your voice that way. We have offices in about 7 different states, and I'm here in California. I think I might have already mentioned that. I just want to make sure you all know I'm in the sunny state of California, which is going through our own challenges now. But we have staff right now, since everything is remote. Essentially, we're able to support a wide number of businesses outside of the states where we don't have visibility. And so, if there is something that if you're looking to share a quote or something like that, there are definitely opportunities and spaces to do that. I think it's really important. A lot of business owners know that their voices matter, but I'm here to tell you, when we think about top trusted messengers and policymakers, they care about small businesses. Your voices are incredibly important. I think when we look at top trusted messengers, we have like a mother and then a veteran and then a small business owner. And so the impact and the weight of who you are, pillars in your community, creating jobs, adding to our local economy, it matters a lot.
Thank you. Well, we're at time. Obviously, this conversation could have gone a lot longer. So thank you to all 3 of you for your help. I know, Dan, you had prepared some documents that we'll share with the participants tomorrow. As Xiomara will be sharing that website as well to make sure that people's voices can be heard and amplified. And Karleen, thank you all for joining us and being part of this conversation. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Sonia, who will lead us off into our IC 100 awards.